Good evening, everyone, to all the attendees and the panelists, or well, morning or afternoon, depending on where you are in the world. Um, Welcome to the 7th edition of Redefining Expectations. My name is Melissa. I'm from Zimbabwe, and I work for the Anzisha Program, which, among many things, is in the business of telling and celebrating the stories of young African entrepreneurs. So I was particularly excited to be asked to host this session. I know that there have been other topics around health, education, governance, and the creative arts, but I truly, earnestly believe that this will be the best one because are so many things to discuss around storytelling on the continent. So as mentioned, we will be discussing reclaiming the African narrative, and we have two awesome panelists who I've known for a very long time, but more importantly, they are working to claim their space in the art of storytelling that has long been a part of African culture, heritage, and history. So welcome, Ukairo and Tapiwa. So excited to have you on the panel. But before we dive into the questions, I just like to introduce our panelists and say a little bit more about who they are. So I'll start with Ukairo, who was born and raised in Nigeria and could have been a lawyer, but we thank God that he decided to pursue a film degree at the University of Texas at Austin in the USA. Over the last couple of seasons, he has gone from filming comedy skits and recap videos for students to having his work featured on BET. He is passionate about telling ordinary stories in extraordinary ways and is currently studying his master's in film and TV production at the University of Southern California's School of Cinematic Arts, where he hopes to further hone his craft. Wow, that school is a mouthful. School of Cinematic Arts. And, and then we also have Tapiwa, who's an award-winning filmmaker from Zimbabwe and is currently an undergraduate student at Barnard College of Columbia University. She has received awards from the National Arts Council of Zimbabwe, the Josie Film Festival, the Connector Film Festival, and the Kalahari Review. Her work includes the 2019 short film Redefining the Road, which garnered critical acclaim. Inspired by ideas of post-colonialism and feminism in Africa, she uses film to dismantle colonial stereotypes of African womanhood by enhancing their visibility within mainstream media. Thank you so much for both of you for joining us today. Before I jump into the questions, I'd just like to encourage the audience to engage with us as we discuss. So please put in your questions in the Q&A section. If someone else has a question that moves you, please also feel free to vote for that question by liking it, and I'll try my best to make sure that it is answered. Okay, so now that we've gotten all the protocol observed things out of the way, I'm excited to dive into this conversation. So the first person I like to ask is Ukairo. Ukairo, I think one of my clearest memories of you is when we were doing a practice interview for you to apply to university in your last year at ALA. I think you said your favorite actor was Leonardo DiCaprio. I think that might have changed over the years. But I do remember how excited you were for the film industry and storytelling. So my question for you is that over your career, have you continued to feel the weight of raising the standard of African film, or do you feel that as long as African stories are being told, then it's okay?
Yeah, hey, can you hear me? Yeah, okay, perfect. Yeah, I thank you for that question. I think the standard needs to be raised, um, for sure. Just just seeing ourselves on this stage of cinema worldwide is a cool win, and I think, but we've always had that. I think sometimes we forget that there's been multiple times when people are like the new Nollywood or the new Africa cinema or um, the new this, new that, but it's always been happening. There are filmmakers that I'm only now getting acquainted with, who have been doing cool stuff. But then when you talk about standard, there's the question of like who determines the standard. And I think that we as a people, I feel like there are technical standards. For example, if I'm watching a film, I want good sound. I don't want someone shouting and then the sound peaks and I'm like, it's distracting because it takes me away from the moment that is being captured. So I think there's a balance there. The fear of not achieving this, my cousins are crying, they're on Zoom classes, it's crazy. But if the standards, technical standards should be achieved, should be strived for, but those standards should not make people afraid of making films with whatever they can get. Because a lot of the time, the people who have the access to resources to get these standards, to reach these standards are privileged, have access from day one. So that's what I'll say about that. But I think we've always been on the playing field. It's now, how can we just make everything excellent to the best of our abilities?
And before I go on to ask Tapiwa a question, when you're responding to that, I couldn't help but think of Nollywood movies and how you can sometimes hear the generator in the background of the film. I don't know if you've ever experienced that. And I guess the question for you is, something like Nigerian film, which is very popular on the continent. I'm sure everyone has at least watched one Nollywood movie or heard about one Nollywood movie. What do you think it would take for filmmaking in the industry such as Nigeria to get to the next level?
I think it would take patience on the part of the filmmakers, which is hard because there is an economy, a micro economy that exists in, well, you can't really call it macro because Nigeria is like a big, Nigeria is an idea, Nigeria is a brand, Nigeria is a people, and there is a big economy, the pirated movies economy in Lagos, right? So people are making films, shooting them in people's houses. I have friends who I've gone to school with who people have shot in their houses. And so it's this thing where like hustlers have to eat, and people have to make films. If Nollywood makes Game of Thrones, Nigerians are going to make Game of Thrones the next week. And there's going to be Daenerys, there's going to be a fake dragon because our VFX is actually getting better. But I think now the question becomes, if you're like at the level of Kunle Afolayan, Genevieve Nnaji, some of the bigger filmmakers in Nigeria specifically, and these are not the only filmmakers that should be studied. I think Nigeria tends to be this what's it called? Like there's a monomyth of Africa and it's Nigeria, but no, there's like people who have not been studied yet. I think it just requires patience. Make your film, spend a year on your film, spend 2 years on your film. And then more importantly, where does the government come in? Because the government, there's not a lot of like standards and institutions, and African civilizations from way back in the day had institutions. I don't say that we shouldn't have institutions now. They're not a bad thing. There might be corruption, there might be issues, but we'll figure it out. Let's just have institutions. The Directors Guild, Directors DGA, DGN, Directors G something of Nigeria, Directors G something of Zimbabwe, and then I think then we start having conversations across the board, and then we can determine what the standards are for us, what excellence looks like in terms of cinematic excellence, African cinematic excellence. The conversation can happen when we're thinking bigger than just the microeconomy of Lagos, Apapa, pirated movies.
Thank you, Ukairo. I'm particularly a fan of Nollywood and excited to see how the film can continue to grow in its standard. And I think it's already getting there, definitely. But on the other side of the spectrum is Zimbabwe, which does it have a film industry? That's a big question I ask myself all the time. So Tapiwa, my question is for you is just, could you tell us about your journey to deciding that film was important to you, storytelling was important to you, particularly coming from a country where I think the creative arts are there and there's definitely a wealth of talent, but they're just not prioritized?
Thank you, Ms. Melissa, and thank you for having me. I don't think it's unique to want to tell stories. I think every human being loves speaking and wants to be heard and wants to be seen. And I think it was more so a matter for me of listening to that part of me that wanted to tell those stories. And I think it came from there not being such a robust film economy in Zimbabwe, and I felt like I wanted to be part of that gap. I think not having that creative outlet in like in an academic space to explore film critically, I really wanted to get into that a lot more. And then I went to ALA, and it was, hey, you can make films and get graded for it. And I think my mind was just completely blown. I'd always loved acting, and I'd always loved telling stories and all, but now I'm just going to regurgitate the Redefine Expectations video on me, so I won't. Yeah, I think it was definitely coming from a point of needing to fill, no, I won't say fill, but needing to be in that gap where there isn't that much storytelling from Zimbabwe. We have fantastic storytellers, novelists particularly. I think of Dambudzo Marechera and Tisi Dangarembga and Shima Chinochka. There are so many writers from Zimbabwe, but I think because film is particularly an economic question as well, and relies a lot on money, I think I knew it would be hard, but I know we have stories, and I wanted to be in that thinking process of how do we get them visual as well.
That's so cool, Tapiwa. And what that reminds me of is just when I was reading your bio, when you were talking about how you like to use film to dismantle colonial stereotypes of African womanhood. So I guess the question that comes to mind for me is that sometimes what you want to do and your aim and your objective with the film doesn't necessarily fit what the audience wants to see and hear. So my question for you is, do you find yourself sometimes changing the characters and the story to suit a world audience that can consume what you're producing?
I think that's a question that every filmmaker, every artist goes through all the time. Do I create for the muse or the audience, which will eventually be the money? And I think I don't think I'm on a large enough scale to have to grapple with that question too much, because my audience is mainly students. Thank you, thank you for watching. Because my audience is mainly students, I can create as critically as I want. But I also find it hard because audiences have a certain expectation of the narrative they want to hear. And I've battled with that a bit in my last 2 documentaries, wondering whether I'm telling wondering how authentic is this story, and how does my knowledge of who is going to receive this film play into it. I've never really changed a character yet, and again, I think that's because I'm not on a scale I'm not overly reliant on my film for my livelihood that I need to do that. And I think that's just a really hard question, particularly for African filmmakers, where you want to create so earnestly and honestly with what you have, but also understanding the economic questions and repercussions of not satisfying your audience. But one thing that I would like to say is I think there's an audience for everything. And I think, voices that you think cannot be heard, like if I made a film, like for example, Vudzi, I did not think, a lot of women would reach out to me and be like, I resonate with this so much. It felt like such an isolated stories. But because human life is such a universal thing, nothing that we really ever experience is unique. And so I also do want to acknowledge that there is space for your story, no matter how out of the mainstream. I think that's what becomes the mainstream. Like, if you think of Jibril Diop Mambeti or Usman Semben, they weren't making mainstream stories. They were telling stories, and all of a sudden you have Martin Scorsese, who's like, that is African cinema. And so, not that his validation matters, but anyway. But there is an audience for your story, and that's another thing that I have to continuously conscientize myself with. And it doesn't necessarily mean that you will, make enough money at the time, but know that as you grow, as people know about you and your work and your audience expands, it will be there and it will be filled. So, yeah.
I think that's such a great segue to my next question, because I think people who are tuning in probably want to know a little bit more about just the romantic idea of studying film and storytelling versus to the practical challenges that young filmmakers face every day in the film industry. So I guess my next question is to Ukairo, and just to understand, because you're a few steps ahead of Tapiwa in that you're now studying your master's, you were featured on BET. What are the practicalities of being a filmmaker? Do you sometimes think you could go back in time and be the lawyer that you were going to be because you would have bank instead of maybe struggling if you're struggling? Just like, what does it look like to pursue that career economically?
Yeah, thank you, Ms. Melissa, for that question. It's a deep one. It's a troubling one. I'll give you an example. I took a history class in my final year of UT last year. I had a friend, shout out to him. He'll know if he's watching this, and he was a computer science major, and we both graduated at the same time. And oh boy, bags his job. You know, bags an OPT, which is the thing that enables you to work in America after you graduate, but has 3 years of that. As an artist, I have one to find a job, to move from an F1 visa to, you know, an H1B or whatever it is that would enable me to pursue. So I'm talking about the policy alone in terms of coming to America and studying film and then going back. So there's already that barrier of the arts are not respected. And I posted something about it on Facebook recently, and I was like, how come, given the fact that there's more supply of artists than there is demand, how come artists are not getting more time to try and get stable income or whatever that looks like? So it's a question for people. If you can vote, go vote. You know what I'm talking about. Now, another thing is film. Sometimes it's a labor of love. Sometimes it's a way of. Sometimes it's a means of like getting income. But I think that balance is something that every artist goes through. One of my director teachers explained to us, Wes Anderson, who's a very well-respected American filmmaker, who made Moonrise Kingdom and Fantastic Mr. Fox, Isle of the Dogs or something. He still makes commercials for Visa, the card. Like he still has to feed his family. Matthew McConaughey still does commercials for Lincoln. It just seems that at some level you can never really get to the point as a filmmaker where it's like, okay, I have a stable income, unless you work in a production company, which again, you still have to go out and find clients. So in some way, no matter how established you are, you're still to some degree freelancing. Even Christopher Nolan, I'm sure, like maybe gets people submitting scripts to him and he's like, nah, I don't want to do that. Or he might have wanted to say Warner Bros to take his stuff and then they don't take it and it's Paramount Pictures. I'm making all this up, but all of that to say that in the arts, you just never stop needing people to see value in what you're trying to create to give you money, because without money, there's only so much you can make. So it's a tough process. I'm gonna go into loans. Like I'm gonna have loans. I had a full scholarship when I did my UT degree, but I'm gonna have loans, and it's just the vibes. But what encouraged me to keep pushing is family support. My vision for why I want to be, the thoughts. I mean, I'm an Aba boy. I'm an Naija boy. I'll figure something out. I make the money like somehow. If it means being an editor or being working in a production company, I will. I want to do commercials because quicker bucks, pay better. You can send multiple treatments out to companies or to artists, make music videos. There's ways to figure out how to make money. And I encourage every creative who's watching this now, go and just research, watch YouTube, type how to. I do that all the time. And I put the YouTube video at ×2 speed, because then a 40-minute video becomes a 20-minute video. So if I watch 2 videos, it's 40 minutes. You do the math, right? Watch these videos and learn and study how people are making income. Some people are making bank, some people are wedding videographers and they're making money. They're raising their children with wedding videography work, so you can make it happen, but it's not going to be easy. And there's going to be moments when you're going to be like, what in the world am I doing? Last year, before I applied for my master's in film, I almost applied for a master's in IT, because I wanted to make 6 figures after after 2 years, and use the 6 figures to channel into my art. But then again, the thing about this is it's a balance. It's a balancing act. It's not a balance. There's no 50-50. Sometimes it's 80-20, sometimes it's 20-80, sometimes it's 60-40. And I reason it this way. If we think about, and I hate to use Oz, because again, this is the problem with storytelling. I don't have enough African folk tales to reference that everyone would understand universally. So for the sake of this conversation, that is not by any means supposed to be Eurocentric, I'm going to use Oz. When Dorothy goes to Oz, imagine Oz is like, no, let's use Alice in Wonderland. If Wonderland is the place where your dreams and your ideas about storytelling and characters that are named after African people, fruits that are actually found in Africa, trees, people, aunties, akara by the street. If Oz is that place in your mind, sorry, Wonderland, let's stick to Wonderland. If Wonderland is that place in your mind, if you're doing engineering, you're going to have your 9 to 5. So every point in time, even if you're spending 5 minutes a day in Wonderland, you're going to leave Wonderland and have to come back to reality, you know, and that back and forth process can be whiplash for you as a creative, you know, and I know there's a level that I'm talking at, which is sort of metacognitive, but that's how I've understood creativity. It's all metacognition. And I encourage filmmakers to just, and artists, just figure it out. There's a way. You might not blow, you might not make money, I might not make money, I might never win an Oscar, not that I care, because I want to win African Movie Awards, if anything. But if none of that ever happens, I hope that I make stuff and then people respond to my work the way people responded to Tapiwa's, which is, I can relate to, I see myself in the story you told. That is, to me, is more powerful than money. However, when the family comes into the conversation, then it gets tricky. But I'll stop talking now. Those are all my thoughts on that.
Cool. I mean, so like just based on what you just said, it's clear that you've had your ups and downs and your struggles, because like you said, you still have to make bank even though you want to be creative. So my next question is, have you heard, well, we was talking about it before, the Ukairo boys, which is, I don't know if anyone in the audience knows them. It's just this Instagram account of these cute like Nigerian boys who are mimicking film, and they've gotten a lot of notice from people in Hollywood, from Netflix, from J.J. Abrams, I think. So my question for you, Ukairo, is like, what do you think about that and how people are consuming film that way? It's social media. And then a second question is, how does it feel to like have been struggling for so long, trying to hone your craft and get your content out there, and then like these kids have this Instagram account for like 6 months and it blows? Like, what does that mean to you?
Those are not easy questions. In fact, I applied for a film gear competition, and the results is announced. It's going to be announced 7 p.m. So today is kind of big for me. If I get the gear, if I get that Sony, it's over. Anyways, regarding the question, how do I feel about that? I feel good about it because I think there's a point you come to let me talk about as a Nigerian, and again, like the Nigerian monuments needs to go away. There's more, Nigeria is not Africa. As a Nigerian person, I think I look at the situation and I'm like, the Ukairo boys were making all that content, making content, trying to secure views on YouTube, trying to get people to vote for them, trying to maybe figure out a way, because they had dreams to expand. Which Nigerian governor brought out money and said, here's 1 million naira, let me just give you $5,000, go crazy, go to ShopRite and just shop for resources? Where were they? So there's this whole thing about, we don't need J.J. Abrams and Ava DuVernay to come and save us. And I'm like, okay, you don't need those people to come and save the Ukairo boys or to save people who are trying to make stuff on Instagram. Are you contributing to their livelihoods though? You know, are you going to respect them, or are they just those cute, you know, just not that cute, calling them cute boys an issue, but like, you know, just boys who just make cute videos on Instagram that are funny? Chris Hemsworth retweeted. You know, so my thing is, it's two things. I'm glad they got the resources that they got. Number one. Number two, shame on the government for not supporting them. Shame on the public, really, for not even supporting them more than a retweet, for not putting money into them. And I think the question is, what are we going to do to empower people like that when we see talent? We don't support talent. I'm sure Tapiwa can agree. And then the third thing would be, those guys, by the time Corona and everything ends, they're going to be potentially in the studios that I hope that one day I'm going to be in, and I'm happy for them, because they're going to make it. They're going to help me dream, and they're going to help other people coming after them dream. So it's all good, fun and dandy for me. I know there's this whole like white savior complex narrative that goes on these kinds of conversations, but my own is, the question is, who saving is the thing. Let somebody. There was no saving happening. Those guys were cool. If anything, maybe now people are going to be like, oh, I want to see the next J.J. Abrams film. So they did J.J. Abrams and Ava DuVernay a favor, to be honest, because maybe someone might Google, you know, there was an exchange there. I don't want people to think it was like these people helped them out. It's not. These guys were popular on their own rights. Now, regarding how I feel good. Let me tell you why. it's something Tapiwa said earlier that I resonate with so much as an artist. There's 7 billion people in the world. There's an audience for everyone. I was never at any point pushing my cousins in a wheelbarrow, pretending it's a Ferrari or a Tesla or Travis Scott. I don't know if you've seen the Travis Scott videos. Wild. These guys are so creative, you know, and the person who edits and shoots for them, hats off to him, because we forget him, but I'm glad that he's invisible. He doesn't show himself. You know, servant leadership. You see, servant leadership. So I think their market is there. I'm not looking to get the attention of those people unless people are interested in what I have to say. There are stories that I'm interested in, and I think them carving the path for themselves makes me feel like, oh, I can find my people. There's people everywhere. Because when you think about the idea that they do, it's actually absurd. Like, what, right? But look at them now, and where they're going to be many years from now. So I'm excited for them, and I hope one day I get to meet them. I'm a big fan. Like, I watch the videos. Like, it's inspiring.
Thank you, Kiro. I think you touched on something that I'm going to ask Tapiwa about as well, talking about how some of these Western filmmakers or producers are willing to fund Ukairo Du Bois, right? They're willing to open their pockets to them. So then my question for you, Tapiwa, is just what are your thoughts around the shift in the way audiences consume content in 2020. And I'm particularly talking about the role of companies like Netflix, where they even had a whole campaign of Made by Africans, Watched by the World. How do you feel that such a big Western influences, what does that mean for African stories and the way that we tell them and the way that people consume them?
I probably think very similarly to Ukairo here. But, you know, I think it makes it a whole lot more accessible. I remember looking for Usman Semben's film, and I had to get one of my teachers to ask one of his colleagues to go to UCT's Department of Film to get old films from the African continent. And I think because, like Ukairo says, there aren't any concrete film institutions, both in like African countries and the continent as a whole, it's hard for me to access a film from a different part of the world. And so I think as an audience member, I love being able to access content from the African continent. We won't talk about the quality yet, but we'll definitely talk about the content. And I think it sort of democratizes it, you know, like it's sort of like, oh my God, why is Netflix so concerned with Africa? Like they should, you know, live with it. But the reality is African artists deserve as much as Western artists or as any artist to survive, you know. We deserve that, and there is a lot of politics behind it. I wish we did have, like, I mean, there's Showmax, and I wish we had a lot more platforms on the continent that allowed streaming services. But again, economically, we don't have that much money for internet. There isn't that many people who can, you know, like, if we had the money, I would love for us to have our own, you know, like African Netflix, African Showmax. But the point is that we don't, and it would be so lovely to wait, but artists will not wait. And there are people who want to, you know, tell stories and write stories. And so I feel like it's unfair to tell somebody to be like, no, don't, you know, put your work on Netflix because, you know, the big Pan-African mission, wait until we have our own thing. And like Ukairo says, as soon as the government says, you know, we're giving out $1 million or we are, you know, doing something that, you know, creates that network, I'm so ready to have the platforms there. But I also think I'm so excited for ALA alumni, for young African people, because I think we are that network. We are, in the next couple of years, the people who will create those institutions. And I know we all have different sort of ideas and opinions. But what I love particularly about, you know, like ALA's network particularly, is just how passionate each creative is for creating something sustainable for artists on the continent. And so I think it is an opportunity for us to create those platforms. But also, and I don't know how to answer this question, if Netflix is doing it, do we need to as well? Do we need to make an African Netflix? Do we need to make an African, you know, we're like always trying to create African WhatsApp, you know, African Facebook, African Twitter. I know it's a thing that goes, and it's just, if people are watching that, is it necessary? And then the last thing I will say on that is it's also not all rosy. I don't think that these people are getting as much royalties as they should be. I think there's also specific, I think there's also a specific image that Netflix is asking from Africa. And because we need bank, I'll make a film about an African superhero. No, you know, but you also can't deny the politics. And, you know, there are things that Netflix wants that is not allowing African filmmakers to be as open. And also, like, Netflix is also it belongs to a small microcosm of the continent. It's very exclusive to middle-class households, you know, and that's a very small population of the African continent. And so it might look like progress, but it's like only progressing the educated elite already, the people who do have access to that already. And if your stories are to change, you know, reclaim narratives and change how Africans view themselves, which Africans are viewing your work? And are those the Africans that need to see it? So.
Oh, that got deep a little, Tapiwa. But I held on to something you said before about Netflix showing African movies, but then quality aside, but bringing quality back into the conversation. And this is similar to the question I asked Ukairo. Do you feel the pressure of raising the standard of the film that you produce because historically people have just not respected African film as much as it should be respected? So do you, or you also just, as long as I get it out there and I get the story out there and people watching it, then it's okay?
I think I can only speak for myself, because I think each artist has their own motive for creating film. And I create film. I love one of my mentors, and he's an ALA faculty member, staff member, faculty member, and he says a photograph is made, not taken. And I think it's the same with film. And I'm really interested in the process of making a film, and that means I want to pour hours and hours on end refining my craft, which is why I sort of taken a hiatus on, you know, producing content, because I you know, I'm an artist because the aesthetic creation of it is something that I love. And I think for me, I think quality is such an important thing. And I think it's easy to want to be impatient with my work, because I need money, because it would be so great to become Instagram famous tomorrow. And then, I don't know, Beyonce finds my work and wants me to work for Black is King. It would be lovely. And I think, you know, it's hard balancing that with I need to get it out so I'm seen, because we depend so much on being seen. But I think artistry is such a patient and long process, and your work needs to marinate. And so on one hand, like, I love Nollywood, and like, I don't know, is it Zollywood? Not Zollywood. There's one in Uganda, you know, where they just make movies like super cheap. I love it because you're creating consistently. And it's
Hollywood.
That one. Yeah, well, you know, it's just, I love it so much. That isn't my motive as an artist, because I'm really interested in the aesthetic pleasure, like aesthetic function of work, but also I don't agree with making art for art's sake. I think it's a very it's a notion that's very much limited to people who have the time, which is oftentimes very privileged people. You know, we also just don't have the time to let our work marinate. You know, like, the reason you have Martin Scorsese and, you know, Spike Lee and Wes Anderson being able to make the, you know, those kinds of films that are such high quality is because they have time, and time is a result of money. You know, you're able to, you know, I'm gonna spend 3 years taking a break of life because I can make this film. And I can't speak for them. I know their lives are completely different, but I'm just saying, in terms of like the politics of it all, it's so much easier for, I think, a white creator in America already with that access to take time off and make that, because they have the economic security of a sort of stable economy. Whereas for me, I can't just take off 3 years of my life to make a really good piece of work or to hone my craft, you know, like black tax, you've got so many things. So I do feel that pressure. And I definitely want to create. I think I can't wait for the standards of African film to be raised. I can't wait.
I have two more questions, one for each of you before we open it up to the audience. For you, Tapiwa, I guess I want to know, what does it mean to reclaim the African narrative for you individually?
I don't think it means anything to me. And I say that because I think the idea of reclaiming means that there was a narrative to take to begin with. And I think the narrative that's been set out isn't mine, and it's not one that I want to claim. There is no existing narrative that I want to take back. It was never mine. So I would say, though, that claiming the African narrative, or I want to say claiming because it suggests ownership, and I don't have, and I would say telling something true, is saying something true, something that feels real and feels right to me at that point. And also, what is the African narrative? Like, Africa is not a country, tell a story that feels true because it's true. And I'm kind of getting bogged down with telling an African story, because then again, it asks, what does an African story look like? Is there a sun in the back? Is there an acacia tree? Is there like elephants walking somewhere? Is there like a woman? Like, what is an African story? And I don't have the answer. And so I would say reclaiming the African narrative is just reclaiming any narrative that feels true to you in your experience. Because then there is the question of who's African. I'm sorry, there's so many questions. But if you are African, or if you tell the story that feels true to you, that represents you, that feels like it speaks to you and it would speak to others. That's it.
That definitely resonates, Tapiwa. I think we should stop trying to pursue this one story of the continent. And I love how you just expressed yourself. And I guess it's a tough act to follow. But Ukairo, what does reclaiming the African narrative mean to you?
For me, it means everything, Tapiwa. It means everything. I know it means nothing to you. I'm joking. I think I'm interested in narratives. I think an S is going to be attached to that in my mind moving forward from this conversation, which is I'm so grateful for, because now I'm thinking. I will say I have to agree with Tapiwa, because you making, I think it's making a truth that feels true, to you, I think is what you do. And I think maybe similar to Tapiwa, I struggle with trying not to sound too abstract, so I actually communicate something that makes sense. But it's really just abstract in my head, because it's not been done in the way that I would do it. Maybe it's been done in a way it was done in Senegal in the 70s or 80s, right? And these are people, some of the people that Tapiwa is mentioning, I'm like literally only now, after 4 years of studying cinema, which is why I went back to film school. But after 4 years of studying, I didn't really think about how do Africans tell stories? What is the African story? What are the African stories? It took, the reason I'm doing a master's in film is because of this question. What are we claiming? What are we reclaiming? What are we possessing? What are we redefining? There's a lot of questions, and again, they're all meta at the level that I'm at right now. What I'm trying to do now as an artist is take the meta and try to make it and try to put it out into a tangible form, into an MP4, into an MOV, into a WAV file. And see if there's a conversation that can be had there because of something that has been shaped into a medium that people can plug in their phones or can watch in their phones. So that's what I'm thinking. How do I take those things and then put it out? But it's just a tough question to address, because but I think it is a thing, or it is a couple things. So abstract, I know, but I'll give an example. I was watching a documentary of Burna Boy that was made for YouTube Artist Spotlight. I was so inspired when I was watching that documentary, because I was like, we need to start making this stuff. The story of Afrobeats, from Fela down. The documentary needs to be made, and I know people are working on it. Like, different people are working on it, but why don't we just consolidate resources? But then you need multiple voices. So it's kind of, anyways. Sorry, I literally still zoned there. Forgive me. I watched that, and as I was watching it, I was moved. And at a point, I literally said, and I will not mince words here, a white person made this. Literally, right? I knew. How did I know? It was the choices. It was the editing choices. It was the shooting choices. But most specifically, it was the camera choice that I had identified as what I call the Nat Geo style, where you use a camera that's going to make it look like you're in close proximity to a subject to capture them. It looks beautiful, it looks glossy and wonderful, but literally you can insert the British man's voice. And he says, little kid in Africa, dancing around with the
David Attenborough.
David Attenborough, right? And I was just like I have an issue with that, because when I film people, I don't say shoots anymore, because we're in Texas. You say shoot, someone will be like, oh, what are you talking about? But when I film people, I love proximity. And I knew proximity was interesting, especially when, I felt like when I started studying people like Bradford Young and Haile Gerima, who are interesting people to study in cinema, and their relationship with cinema, and how cinema doesn't really love Black people. Really, then you start talking about lens choices and distortion of Black people's features with lens. You start tracing these things. You trace it all the way back to the film that D.W. Griffith made, Birth of a Nation. So there's all these conversations to be had. And then in that moment, I was like, if I made this, I know it would look different. And it's not just because I'm a different artist, because of I'm not going to be afraid to have access to these spaces. I'm going to see a kid in Lagos. I'm going to come this way and be right in front of, like this. I'm not scared of him. He's not going to do anything to me. If he tries, I'll beat him.
Ukairo, I'll stop you for a moment there. I know your streams of thoughts are exciting. I love listening to them. But I think I lost you a bit with when you were watching the video.
Right. I'm going to bring it back to that.
Okay, you're going to bring it back. You're going to land.
I'm going to land. I've been flying, so I've been floating. Whoever made that stuff made it in his own way, and I feel like it's the natural style. I would make it different. So I think the more we give cameras to people who are back on the continent, there's this photographer called Kof Motivation, and he talked about, what if we give cameras to African kids worldwide? Sony, Canon, put together resources, just give cameras to kids. Let's see what spaces they capture. Spaces they're not afraid to go to, caves, waterfalls that they're not afraid to dive into. Give them GoPro cameras. Let us see Africa, the Africas that exist across the continent, from a different perspective. I think that is what reclaiming or redefining or refining or now giving definition to the African narrative would mean to me, and there's one lesson I would say. There's also the issue of access. For example, there might be a space that people is going to show up with her camera. They're going to look at her. Who's this woman? What is she doing here? And then she's Black. She looks like her people. It's like, you're going to pay us some money for us to let you film this traditional ceremony. A white man shows up with a camera. Oh, he's a foreigner. Let him film our king. In fact, our king will. These things. So this is a conversation to like what's going on there. But I'll stop there. I'm getting too excited. Yeah.
Thank you, Ukairo. I got where you landed there. Thank you. But I think I'm gonna dive into questions from people who've tuned in. And I'm gonna start. The first one is also a good segue to the Netflix conversation we had, Tapiwa. It's the most voted question, and it says, "How can we?" And you responded to a part of this to your last question. How can we reclaim the African narrative when huge media outlets such as Netflix, Amazon, Apple, Hulu constantly misrepresent marginalized groups and feel entitled to project their views and leadership on the storytelling? That's a huge question. Do you even agree with the question, with the premise of the question?
Would you repeat it, please?
It's how can we reclaim the African narrative when huge media outlets constantly misrepresent marginalized groups? Ukairo, feel free to jump in if you also want to answer this one.
I think it's a complex question, and I'd like to start off the answer with I don't know. I don't. But I think a lot of film is like every film that's made we watch films and we believe them, and I think you see a certain narrative as true because it's believable, and I think because it's been portrayed as something that you could claim as true. And I think two things. I don't think film alone can change the way people see the continent. It never will. And I think you can reclaim that narrative by consistently creating good films, but also critiquing those films. I wish we had a lot more dialogue surrounding films that are made about the African continent by people who aren't from the African continent, in academic spaces, in film spaces, in regular life, because once you sort of discredit once those films aren't credible anymore, it's easier to, you know, accept a new narrative. You can't really learn something without unlearning something. And so I think there needs to be, you know, films that make us, you know, unlearn things that we've learned before. So for example, if I've always been brought up seeing, I don't know, you know, if I've always been brought up seeing the sky is blue, you know, I need a film that shows me that the sky is actually in fact red, which is not true. But I think films on, it's not just creating new narratives, it's redefining narratives. It's taking those narratives and saying, no, that is not true as well. Because I think films also have they play such a pedagogical role. And I think, yeah, I think we also need to not just tell new stories, but also say why that story is not true, or why that story is not the only truth. Yeah, yeah.
Cool, thank you. The next question, I just want to get through these as quickly as possible from the audience. The next question is, to what extent has ALA contributed to your achievements? And this is for you, Ukairo. And I think this is such an exciting question for me, because I found out today from Chris that you made some of the Redefining Expectations videos, which is snaps. So when you talk about how ALA has contributed to your achievements, can you also talk about what it was like for you filming Redefine Expectations?
For sure. I think the first thing ALA gave me was what we call in our halls the Egyptian mafia. I'll explain. I never had a camera before, and it was one of my friends. It might have been Rama Alarian, maybe. But the first time I held a camera was on the quad, and I rack focused from the subject to the leaves, and then it was blurry. The subject was blurry, the leaves were sharp, and then I rack focused back, and then she was sharp, and then the leaves were blurry, and I was like, well, is this how they make music videos? This is what I want to do for the rest of my life. That's how I got into film. So ALA already, first of all, is the reason why I'm doing film. Maybe I wanted to tell stories. Did I write some storybooks? Yeah, I did. But did I illustrate as well? Yeah, but ALA gave me the resources. So that is the story. That's how it started. The second thing that ALA gave me was the opportunity to say yes to my ideas. Creativity Symposium with Mr. Gavin Peter was a space where I was researching creativity, you know, and maybe that's why I have this weird, I guess, academic pseudo-intellectual relationship with creativity. I want to understand the understanding. I want to think about the thinking, because that was all I got to do in that class. And so the space of ALA, the events, all that creativity, Mr. Veda, all the teachers who were like, oh, be creative. That is why I'm like, oh, there is such a thing as having a lifestyle as a creative. Even if you're an IT guy, you know, your creativity can still show, even if you're like, no matter what space you are. So ALA did that for me. And really contributed to my success, because it was at ALA that I applied to study film in the US, and then now I'm here. And then, you know, there's that big thing that I'm sure every ALA student here is like, change Africa, the next generation of African leaders. You know, so there's this good pressure there that exists. Regarding filming Redefining Expectations, it was a lot of fun, because it was a lot of fun because I got to work with Mr. Faith, who's like a mentor, whether he knows or not, but he's a mentor, someone I really look up to, and work with and meet other students who had come after me, students who had come before me. So in a way, I kind of got a lens, but cinematically, into the past and the present, and I was right in the middle of it, creating what it meant. So that was pretty exciting, and I would love to do it again and do more stuff like that, where we tell ALA's story as it's being made consistently. Yeah,
that's exciting. Thank you, Ukairo, and I think you did such a great job in that. Those films are excellent, and I love sharing them. You guys are truly storytellers. I'll say that. So just to get through the questions really quickly, I'm going to cut us off after a certain time. So the next question for you, Tapiwa, which is, as an aspiring African content creator, do you think that Africans consume too much media culture that comes from outside the continent, that their diet is not balanced with local content? It's a great question.
I'd love to thank all of the people who are asking these questions. They are so thoughtful, and they are questions that plague my waking hours. As always, I think more than one thing, but I will keep it short. I think I think people want to be entertained. And I think people have every right to want to receive something. And when that isn't being sort of filled or in an accessible way. So for example, if somebody needs to go to the archives of was once Colonial Library to find a really good film from the African continent, it would be so much easier to go onto YouTube and stream something from elsewhere. I also think that that question is built on the premise that we're not watching our own content. And as a Zimbabwean, I don't think that's true. I think there is a series that I absolutely love. It's called Wadiwa Wepamoyo. Complete side note, but it's a series. It's accessible on YouTube, and most of my Zimbabwean friends are watching that. And it's access. I think the question is access. What do people have access to? And if I think we create work that isn't limited to academic institutions, work that's either on YouTube or Vimeo, understanding that it doesn't always make a lot of money, work that is accessible will be received. I do think though that there is such an influx of Western media that as soon as somebody hears Ava DuVernay's made a documentary, it's going to be so much more received than if somebody hears that Wanuri, don't learn from babe, but Wanuri from Kenya has made a film, unless it's super controversial. We also do need to acknowledge that we place African artists almost as inferior, or we just don't give them as much as much respect. You'd rather pay $50 to watch an Ava DuVernay film because wow, everybody on Instagram is watching it, and then an African artist charges you $20 and you're like, Eesh, can you give me a discount? Why are you so expensive? So 2 things. I think people are watching local content. Nollywood is such a good example. I remember growing up on African movies. I grew up on them. I can name the main actors right now, But I think another thing, as audiences, we need to be a lot more critical about the prejudices we hold and how much respect we give artists from the African continent.
Yeah. And I think what you said about access is so important. I mean, I know in Zim, there are even some shows that get really popular on WhatsApp. People just send each other the episodes, right? So what the world looks like in consuming content now is completely different to what it used to look like. Okay, next question. The audience has got a lot of questions. So, Ukairo, what advice can you give to young, aspiring visual storytellers? What steps should they follow to start a documentary, for example?
Okay, I'm going to look at the time. It's 11:52 right now in Texas. I'm going to try and spitball. And then my contact info, I hope they can share it with you all so that you can reach out to me. I really, I respond eventually, but I do respond. Number one, watch tutorials. Just go on YouTube. I said that before, but I'll say it again. Just go on YouTube. I learned a lot, no shade on undergrad, but I learned a lot more about the practicalities of filmmaking from YouTube and from being in the arena than I did in class. But class gave me some ideas about how things work. So I'm not trying to say anything about my professors or anything, not at all. I dare not. That's the first thing. So number two, go and make a small documentary, a small version of what you want to make. That could be a good way for you to practice. Whatever you can do to practice, go practice. Watch other documentaries, watch short documentaries. Go to YouTube and type Nat Geo films or Nat Geo documentaries. Watch those documentaries. They're tiny. Usually they just have voiceover. They don't have characters necessarily getting interviewed. Study 3-point lighting. Whoever is watching this, study 3-point lighting, how to light your subjects. Study how to light talking heads. Because once you have a talking head, you have a scene play out. You cut back to the talking head. That's a documentary. Vloggers are documentarians. I don't know if it's clicking for people, but it's looked down on your vlogging. But vloggers are documentarians. Casey Neistat makes documentaries. I want to name an African vlogger that I know, but I can't think of one. See, that's wahala, exposure and stuff. Why don't I know any African vlogger I can just name? I know their content, but I don't know their names. So watch tutorials, practice. I can't emphasize this enough. Just study the craft, try and make it. But more importantly, even if you're not studying, just go and make something and then fail and then learn and then you get better. Also, very importantly, this is a mindset thing because practicality is very cool and all. Mindset. Do not think that this documentary you're going to make is going to be your magnum opus or it will stop you from making anything. If you put in 10 years into this documentary, what about the 10 documentaries you could have made per year and potentially gotten better because you're telling multiple stories? So do not put so much pressure. 11:54. Do not put too much pressure on yourself to make the project. Just make a project, then make multiple a projects. Make 10, and then you get better.
Thank you. I'm sorry I made you rap through that answer, but thank you very much. I love the practical advice that you gave, Ukairo. I think sometimes these ideas are up in the sky, so it's good to know that you can just watch a YouTube tutorial to get you started. We're left with about 5 minutes, so I have the same question for both of you, a fun one to wrap it up. So Tapiwa, the audience member asked, what are your top 3 African motion picture recommendations? Let's narrow that to 2. What are your 2 African motion picture recommendations? And Ukairo, I'll ask the same.
I Am Not a Witch by Rungano Nyoni. Just right here,
I Am Not a Witch?
Yeah, I'm Not a Witch. I know, again, it's probably inaccessible, but there may be a site to find it. But you didn't hear that from me. You didn't hear it from me. I don't know where you heard that. I don't know. But golden for me. I would say why, but and then I just think, to understand the history of African cinema on the African continent, if you want to be more critical, go watch Black Girl, or Tukibuki or Hyenas. They're very old and access is hard, I know, but Black Girl is probably a lot more accessible. Yeah.
Who's the director for Black Girl, please?
Usman Semben. Such a great place to start. Atlantics was also really, really good, and it's on Netflix, I think. So I gave 3, but top 3.
Thank you.
Bearing in mind, my vocabulary on African film is like this. And I'd like to, yeah.
Okay, so I Am Not a Witch, Black Girl, and Atlantis. Those are the 3 that you've given.
Atlantics. It's Atlantic, but yeah.
Atlantics. Okay,
yeah.
Cool. And Ukairo, what are your 3?
I'm a drama fan, so I will say top number 1 will be 50. It's on Netflix. It features 5 women in Lagos. It's coming in of age, but they're older, so it's very interesting. Not that coming of age can't happen at any point in your life. But yeah, 50 because of technical excellence. If you want to watch, because of this conversation about standards, if you want to watch a film that did not have any technical errors, in my opinion, humble opinion, 50. And then number 2 would be I don't think that I have a number, because again, I'm in a season in my career where I'm trying to be excellent. I want everything to be perfect technically, at least, even if the story has issues. Yeah, I'd say 50, and that's it. I am exploring the filmmakers that Tapiwa is mentioning currently, trying to study them, like Sembene and Haile Gerima. Yeah, Haile Gerima. Haile Gerima should be studied. He's an Ethiopian filmmaker. He made a film called Sankofa. And so maybe those 2. I've not even finished Sankofa. I'm recommending it, but yeah. Yeah, 50 is number 1.
Okay, thank you. So 50 and maybe possibly Sankofa after you finished watching it. Thank you guys. That was really great. That was an enjoyable conversation. I think if anything, it's told us that there's so much to talk about around storytelling and the African narrative, whether there is an African narrative or there isn't an African narrative. Is it for people? Is it for anyone? Is it for everyone? Really like to thank you guys for just your contributions to the conversation. And I hope whatever you shared today can be inspiring to anyone who's participated, who is trying or thinking about pursuing filmmaking and storytelling with an African voice. So thank you, everyone. Thank you for the panelists. Thank you for the team that set this up. Thank you to everyone who attended. And just before I leave, because you can't leave a hosting gig without plugging your own work, so I would love to encourage everyone to watch It Starts With You, which is a mini documentary series that has been created by the Anzisha Prize. I'll trust one of my team members to just put the link in the chat. But please do watch the documentary series if you're into African stories, if you're into entrepreneurship, if you're into just watching good content, because on the continent, we do make good content, and Ukairo and Tapiwa are great examples of that. So thank you, everyone. Hope you enjoy the rest of your evening or your day. We managed to end on time. Bye, guys. Thank you.
Bye, guys.
Thank you so much. I love this. I just copy pasted all of these questions because I I love them. I do. And I love this conversation. But thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you.